The CEO of the future. The title of my talk today raises some obvious questions. Will the future be substantially different from the past? Will the changes that lie ahead be evolutionary or discontinuous? How will the CEO of the future be different from his successful predecessor of today? We are not very good at predicting the future. In 1943, Thomas Watson, the chairman of IBM, said, "I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers." In 1949, Popular Mechanics said computers in the future may weigh no more than 1.5 tons. In 1957, the editor in charge of business books for Prentice Hall said, "I have traveled the length and breadth of this country and talked with the best people, and I can assure you that data processing is a fad that won't last out the year." In 1968, Robert Lloyd, an engineer at the Advanced Computing Systems division of IBM, commenting on the microchip, asked, "But what is it good for?" In 1977, Ken Olsen, president, chairman, and founder of Digital Equipment Corporation, said, "There's no reason anyone would want a computer in their home." Throughout history, man's inability to control the future has prompted academics, journalists, and social commentators to attempt to define a future based on inductive or deductive reasoning or the extrapolation of fairly recent trends. Enough of them have done so for some of them to be right. The second thing we know is that none of them has been sufficiently or consistently or definitively correct for any CEO to rely on. And so we all interpret information from our own perspectives. We formulate our own views. We make our life and business choices based on those views. Those choices determine the course of our lives and the success of our companies, and our cumulative choices determine the course of history. Having posed the question, will the future be substantially different from the past, I'm confident that all of us here today can be sure that it will be, and that tomorrow's CEO will have to deal with significant change. The question that follows, though, is will the change be evolutionary or discontinuous? Will it be gradual enough for us to adapt as leaders and organizations, or will the change be so dramatic that we and our organizations are rendered obsolete? In 1969, when I was 19, Peter Drucker wrote The Age of Discontinuity. In it, he identified 4 factors that would result in discontinuous change. These were the rapid emergence of new technologies and the associated industries, the emergence of a genuine world economy, the pluralism of institutions, and knowledge as the new capital. Drucker was right about all of these trends, but in my experience, he was wrong about them being discontinuous or disruptive from the CEO's perspective. For 28 of the 39 years since then, I've been the CEO of 3 public companies and a director of 7 other public companies. Not once in that time did I see change that was discontinuous or revolutionary. Within the time frame of corporate strategic horizons and decision making, all change has been evolutionary, and those companies that survived and prospered were the ones that were able to adapt. Some of you who have lived through your first recession and listened to the hyperbole used to describe the current global financial crisis might say that this is not the case. You might say that what has happened over the past 3 years was so dramatic that it will forever change the way we do business. The facts suggest otherwise. But one of the more inane comments I have heard is that the current recession reflects a failure of the market system. Nothing could be further from the truth. The current recession is the market doing its job as no other force could. Just 3 years ago, millions of consumers all over the world were indebted beyond their means with overvalued assets. As my wife once put it, people were buying things they did not need at prices higher than they should have paid with money they did not have to impress people who did not care. 3 years ago, many central banks had interest rates that were inappropriate for their country's circumstances. 3 years ago, banks were hopelessly overgeared, with the asset side of their balance sheet populated with instruments they did not understand. 3 years ago, throughout the world, there were incompetent CEOs riding the crest of a 6 or almost 10-year economic expansion. Today, all of this has changed with a scale and speed that only the market could have caused. While painful to many, all of these issues are being rectified by the market, which has caused extinction, mutation, and evolution that will place us on the road to recovery. Those companies and CEOs that were unable to manage for a 3.6% probability of financial disaster will not and should not be with us for much longer. Information and telecommunications technology has revolutionized the way we do business. Or has it? You may be surprised to hear me say once more that from the perspective of a CEO or a company, this has also been evolutionary rather than revolutionary or discontinuous. Has this changed the way we work? Of course it has. Was the change revolutionary or disruptive? For the most part, it was not. I could go on in a similar fashion about the effects of globalization or Drucker's pluralism of institutions, but my conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, is a simple but confident one. There will be change in the future, and as I will discuss shortly, it will require CEOs to adapt. But that change will continue to be evolutionary, punctuated by events that seem more dramatic at the time than when viewed in the context of a CEO's or a company's life. And so, how will the CEO of the future be different from her counterpart in 2009? The first evolutionary trend is a shift from the priority of business enterprises from creating shareholder value to balancing the reasonable expectations of stakeholders. A telling legacy of the global financial crisis is the deplorable image of business in the eyes of civil society. The last vestiges of trust have been eroded by appalling, oftentimes criminal behavior by some business leaders and blatant short-term self-interest by too many others. I always wondered how a CEO could be more concerned about the owners of the company than the customers, employees, suppliers, communities, and government who determined its survival. Today, the demands of stakeholders are far more strident than I anticipated, and they will escalate in future. The CEO of tomorrow will be required to invest a considerable amount of thought, time, and energy to establish and sustain credibility with all stakeholders. The legitimacy and survival of the CEO of tomorrow will be determined by the degree to which the corporation is seen to serve the interests of all associated with it. Put bluntly, the CEO of the future will be called to account on whether the wealth being created by the corporation is being shared equitably. With the average lifespan of a company still far from that of a human being, surely the objective of the firm must be to survive. Surely our obligation as CEOs is to do those things that enable the company to endure beyond us. When I was 28, I crafted a management credo, which I carry with me to this day. One of the 6 important principles I wrote into that credo was called the long-term perspective of decision-making. And I quote, "Our decision-making, when it involves issues that materially affect stakeholders, is taken within the long-term context. The question we must ask is, how will this decision look to a corporate historian of the highest integrity, common sense, and humanity 5, 10, or 15 years from now?" A long-term stakeholder orientation forces us to think deeply about the decisions and trade-offs we are called to make every day. It stops us from being expedient, and it results in leadership consistency. In doing so, it eliminates or mitigates the worst aberrations of short-term capitalism. Tomorrow's CEO will know that strategy is the precursor to all corporate achievement. That strategy defines the parameters for the useful expenditure of human energy. That strategy is the CEO's prime responsibility and cannot be delegated, especially not to consultants. Strategy is not an event or a process, but a way of thinking. In a world of increasing complexity, there will be no basis for managing and monitoring corporate performance without strategy. Those of you who believe that you can lead or even manage an organization based on its financial performance are badly mistaken. Financial performance is always, always, always a lagging indicator. It is preceded by operating performance, which is preceded by the leading indicator, human performance. To lead effectively, we need enough information to probe and understand the operating and human performance behind the numbers and to evaluate that against the template of strategies and plans. Looking forward, globalization and competition legislation will increase competition. Tomorrow's CEO will need to have an acute understanding of both the theory of strategy and the drivers of competition in her industry. Moreover, and this is where the operational understanding is essential, she will need to have a thorough knowledge of where the levers of strategic advantage and operational excellence reside. Strategic insight does not come from lofty conceptual thoughts, but rather from intimate and most often detailed knowledge of your industry, your business model, and operations, and your competitors.